The history of London has been dominated by the needs of its people to get about. In fact, the history of London can be divided into three periods. The first, dominated by water travel, the second by rail, and the third by the roads. For a few short miles by the Watford Gap on the M1, the story of transport is separated by less than a mile. The A5 was built on top of Roman Watling Street by the Victorian engineer Thomas Telford. In the 18th century, the Grand Union Canal was dug between London and the Midlands, and alongside runs the 19th century railway. But before all of this happened, the best way to travel was by river and sea. London is here because of the River Thames, because it was a good place to cross it, obviously, but also because it provided fresh fish and drinking water. However, most important of all, because it provided transport, allowing smooth access inland and linking London with other countries and other parts of Britain. In fact, until the 17th century, there was virtually no other satisfactory way to travel at all. The river was originally much wider and wilder. Go back 1,000 years, and it looked much more like the entrance to the Medway River with its marshy banks. Huge tidal variance and a shallow bed created miles and miles of mudflats and foreshore. The Romans set up a port in what is now the Pool of London, and this was brought back into use by the late Saxons. From that time, for 1,000 years, the Pool of London was a trading place of world significance. At first, it was enough for ships to enter the pool. Even in 1884, when Tower Bridge was built, it was essential to allow massive cargo ships right into the heart of London. But by that time, it was realised that for safety, security, and quite simply capacity, more docks would have to be built. The docks were built to allow ships to load and unload their goods into massive warehouses free from the tidal Thames and from the many villains and crooks that tried to pilfer cargoes. St Catherine's Dock, built in 1828, is one of the earliest. Over 1,200 houses were demolished to make way for it. Much larger docks followed, culminating in the massive Royal Docks covering 245 acres. The soil taken from these was dumped in Battersea to level the land for Battersea Park. A 150 years later, the site was big enough to take a runway for the new city airport. The Royal Albert Dock is the largest brick structure in the world, with 3 miles of quay. On these now empty docksides were unloaded the produce of the empire: tea, rubber, wool, matches, even live turtles. Unrefined sugar is still being unloaded at the Silvertown refinery, originally built by Henry Tate in 1878. It'll be refined here in the largest cane refinery in the world. Watching this ship unload is a reminder of the days when in the early 20th century the docks had reached their peak, with over 1,000 ships a week coming and going on the tide. They'd become the largest and most profitable docks in the entire world. The docks were regulated by the Port of London Authority, set up in 1909. This was once their headquarters, designed by Sir Edwin Cooper in 1912 near Tower Hill. On the top, you can see Father Thames and symbols of exportation. But in the 1960s, the docks began to close, thanks to changing technology and labour disputes. In a period of little more than 10 years, the world's greatest docks shrank and vanished, leaving dereliction and unemployment. Only now are the former docks being reclaimed by residential development and, of course, the massive Canary Wharf commercial development. London's port, meanwhile, has moved east to Tilbury, where trade is still carried on. From Elizabethan times, the Thames tributaries, like the River Lee, were being used to move goods to and from the Thames and to link with other towns and villages. In the 18th century, canals played a major part in the industrialisation of the Midlands. And in 1801, canals arrived in London, when the Grand Union Canal was extended past Little Venice to Paddington Basin, thus making a direct link between London and the Midlands. At the moment, the basin is being cleared and dredged for a massive new office development. From 1820, the Grand Union Canal was linked with the Regent's Canal, arching over North London through Islington and Hackney to meet the East End docks at the Limehouse Basin. In this way, the whole of North and East London was linked with the Thames and with the industrial North. The canals also created their own infrastructure. Just south of the long Blisworth Tunnel on the Grand Union is the small village of Stoke Bruerne, which has grown up around the canal trade with quays, wharfs and offices. Canals provided the first efficient and continuous supply of goods to and from the capital, but it was slow. Working a horse-towed barge through a small flight of locks took time. On the Grand Union Canal between London and Birmingham, there are around 116 locks to navigate. But in the early 19th century, a new, fast and much more efficient form of transport was about to be born: the railways. The river, its tributaries, and then the canals had lubricated the wheels of London's commerce for centuries. But it was the railways that were to transform the economy and the landscape of the capital forever. In an astonishing 40-year period between 1836 and 1876, London acquired its main railway termini and a rail network. This remarkable achievement was overseen by a royal commission and a suite of Acts of Parliament. The first terminus was at London Bridge, historically the most important transport point in the city. It was completed in 1838, and the approach and station were raised on a viaduct of nearly 1,000 arches. This was followed by Euston Station, the earliest mainline terminus linking London and Birmingham. But it is today the newest, after a famous conservation battle to save the old station was lost in 1962. Railway companies scrambled to buy land. Tracks and stations were planned, houses demolished, viaducts built and tunnels bored. Huge areas were set aside for shunting and goods yards. One of the largest is the massive Bishopsgate goods yard, now sadly under threat of demolition. In 1851, work started on King's Cross Station. It was named after the crossroads on which it was built that had a monument to George IV in the middle of it. Its engine sheds, 800 feet long, were the largest built in their day. Today, our most elegant railway station is disfigured by a horrible forecourt, which will hopefully be removed. Now the station will be the terminus for the Channel Tunnel. The Midland Railway bought a huge area of slums next door to King's Cross Station in 1863. During the next 4 years, the greatest of the Victorian train sheds was built to cover St Pancras Station, and work started on building the extraordinary and beautiful Gothic hotel on its front. After years of being empty, a scheme is afoot to bring it back into use as a hotel. Waterloo Station is built in a very different style. The Victorian station was considered confusing and out of date, and in 1900 work started on rebuilding it. On the far side is the much newer Eurostar shed. Waterloo was also the station from which the last regular steam train ran in 1967. But it wasn't only London that was affected by the coming of the railways. Brunel's Great Western Railway scribed a line westwards, creating great industrial monuments as it went. Amongst the most remarkable of these is the town of Swindon. Up until the Second World War, Swindon was a railway town. In fact, the world's first railway town, located there because Brunel chose it as the centre of the Great Western Railway. At its peak, the railway works covered 326 acres and employed an astounding 14,000 people. While the new railways effectively delivered people into the heart of the capital, like here at Charing Cross, getting around when they'd arrived continued to be difficult. The roads were jammed with horses and the footpaths crowded with pedestrians. It was thus decided to build an underground railway to link the key railway termini and other buildings. The project was eventually completed as the Circle and Metropolitan line and was up and running by the 1870s. Thanks to the invention of the tunnelling shield, it became possible to dig tunnels 40 feet down for further underground railways. The first to open and be powered by electricity was the Northern Line in 1890. A new headquarters building was built for the underground in St James's over the station. This structure, Broadway House, was designed by the brilliant architect Charles Holden. It seemed in the 1970s and 80s as if the era of rail may well be over. But before we turn to look at road transport, let's just consider a remarkable sight in Kent. Running alongside the M2 at Rochester is the new high-speed Eurostar line between Folkestone and London. At the moment, the Eurostar terminates at Waterloo, but in the near future it'll end between St Pancras and King's Cross, where a vast new railway terminal is being built. Is this a new railway for a new age? Although the history of water and rail travel are inextricably bound up with London's growth and prosperity, for the last 100 years, roads have finally taken their place beside them. Back in ancient Britain, there were trackways. These were the motorways of their day, and the Ridgeway is still in use by enthusiastic walkers. This section passes Uffington Hill Fort on the Berkshire Downs. The Romans needed roads for the rapid deployment of troops and the efficient exploitation of Britain's resources. At Richborough in Kent is the start of one of the most important roads in Roman Britain, Watling Street, which runs through Faversham in a dead straight line to St Albans. Modern roads often follow the same Roman route. They would follow a straight line where possible for efficiency, but curve around hills and other obstacles. Some of the straightest roads in central London were originally Roman, like Oxford Street or Edgware Road, that was the London end of Watling Street. Portway Roman Road runs southwest from Silchester in Hampshire and through Caesar's Belt, where a modern road follows it for a few miles. The Saxons, by and large, ignored Roman roads. Indeed, some early churches were partially built with Roman roadstone. Until the early 18th century, roads were little more than muddy, potholed tracks, grudgingly maintained by the parishes through which they passed. But if the roads were bad, many medieval bridges were beautiful and built so well that they're still in use today. Yalding was built around 1450 and at 100 foot is the longest in Kent. It spans not only the river but the marshy flats on either side. Built in 1423, Stopham is the finest medieval bridge in Sussex, with its 6 elegant stone arches. The central arch was raised in 1822 to allow larger boats to get through. A revolution in transport took place in the reign of Elizabeth I with the invention of the carriage. This led to a network of good roads being built in and around London. For the first time, it was easier, more comfortable and quicker to travel by road than by river. The royal family created their own private roads to get to their palaces. The oldest of these is the King's Road in Chelsea, that allowed kings to get out west from Whitehall to Richmond, Hampton Court and to Windsor. Ordinary people had to pay to use them. Most people travelled on public roads and spent the night on the way in coaching inns where horses were changed, like here in Buckinghamshire at the George and Dragon in West Wickham. From the 16th century to the 19th, the number of horses, carriages and eventually horse-drawn omnibuses grew. Every respectable house had its stables or its mews, today, more often than not, converted into a bijou dwelling. At the turn of the 19th century, just before the coming of the railways, private companies began to build roads for which tolls were charged. Most tolls were removed in the 1830s, but originally even Oxford Street had one. Toll roads covered the country, and in order to collect the fees, toll houses were built like this one at Tidmarsh in Berkshire, which is a rare survival. The tollkeeper lived and worked here, collecting the money from passing carriages and carts. In London, one private toll road still survives on the Dulwich College estate. It was established back in 1789, and today the income from the tolls goes towards the college charity. Bridges are often still in private hands and charge tolls. These include obvious examples like the Queen Elizabeth II Bridge at Dartford, which carries the M25 southbound traffic. In the 18th century, goods moved by road more than trebled. But the fundamental development was the invention of the motor car, the freedom for individuals to travel cheaply and independently. The private motor car appeared on the streets of London in the 1890s, and soon afterwards came the first motorised omnibus that moved people around the city and to and from their homes in the suburbs. Many years later, what many regard as London's premier bus depot was built in Stockwell. This monumental reinforced concrete shelter, built in 1950, can house 200 buses in 73,000 square feet of uninterrupted garaging. It is a modern cathedral. While the 20th century saw the primacy of the car in the street, it also saw the rapid growth of the aeroplane. At Croydon, a military airfield established in 1915 became the first London airport in 1920. Airport House is the first purpose-built passenger terminal in Britain, erected in 1927. Heathrow, now Britain's largest airport and the world's busiest, opened in 1945. Today, nearly 60 million passengers a year fly from 4 terminals, soon to be 5. At peak times, aeroplanes leave Heathrow every 3 minutes. Flying into any of London's airports, it's not the rivers, the railways, or even the airports themselves that dominate. It's the motorways, crowned by London's artery, the M25. A road so successful and so important that we could no more live without it than the Tudors could live without the Thames.